What?
Welcome to the ATP Project.
I was here before, Steve.
Oh, that's just right. Been here for 20 minutes.
Scare the shit out of me like that.
Yeah, just sort of wake you up because we're doing a podcast today and I wanted to wake you up and stimulate you because I wanted to stimulate your adrenal glands.
Steve, why are you telling me this? Like we've been talking about this for the last hour.
I know, but I wanted to tell the people who are listening now.
Oh.
Yeah. So what we're talking about today is the adrenal glands. So you know that the adrenal glands are little almondy shaped things that sit on top of your kidneys there, and they sit there and hang out and do all sorts of stuff that we're going to talk about today. One of the things they do is they pep you up with adrenaline. So let's get into the adrenal glands. Matt, you've got a lot of notes in front of you there.
I took lots of scribble.
Lots of scribble. There's lots of parts of
and
the
you gave
adrenal
me
glands.
a piece of paper with some pictures on it.
Pictures on it, yeah. Pictures are good. So we're going to talk about the adrenals and the cortex and the medulla and other things and aldosterone and drugs and all sorts of things on today. And stress is the big one.
Yeah.
So tell me, how does stress affect the adrenal glands?
Well, that was very full on, Steve.
Yes.
Just take a breath. Slow down. My adrenals.
Very animated.
Wasn't it?
It was like kind of freaking
I
out
want to
now.
get the adrenal glands going.
I was wanting to hide under the
Exactly.
table.
And the funny thing, and that's a good segue, Steve,
segue.
because our body doesn't know the difference between life-threatening stress and you introducing an adrenal podcast. We tend to manifest with a mild stress response because there's this weird guy. We've just been talking to him about this for an hour and all of a sudden he's come at us like, we're talking about this. It's like,
I got the thumbs up from
no,
Vanessa.
Steve. Bloody hell, mate.
I said,
So our body doesn't know the difference between life-threatening stress, imagination, imagined stress, or time-traveled versions of stress where we anxious about the future or regretting things of the past or reliving a trauma. It doesn't know the difference between inflammation, toxicity, pH changes, allergies, intolerances, lipopolysaccharide, which is a bacterial cell wall from an overgrowth of bacteria in our guts. All of these sort of things are classically defined as a stressor.
yeah.
And then what happens, our brain picks it up and says, hey, look, something's not quite right. We have this immediate response to stress, which is our nervous response to stress, which can manifest multiple ways, which we'll talk about in a sec, but that's immediate. And then what will happen is a few seconds later, like around 10 seconds later, our adrenal gland may release some stress-related hormones. The main one we talk about is cortisol.
Related hormones. I love that word.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I'll use it more often. I'll just take a note. Related, Steve loves
Related.
it. He loves
No, it's perfect
relations.
because people think cortisol is a stress hormone.
Yeah, that's right. And people think cortisol is, but cortisol is classically our anti-stress hormone, which is why it's released during a stress response. The thing I love about cortisol is its job is to go back and switch off our stress response. So the fact that cortisol's been released should be enough for our body to go, cool. Like I've launched my stress response. I'm still alive now. I'll reassess every few seconds, and now once that stress is gone, I can wind the whole process down. Cortisol is really cool because cortisol also goes back and addresses a lot of the things we mentioned as the stress triggers. So cortisol is anti-inflammatory. So it'll switch off the inflammation that is driving our stress nervous system, as well as switching off our all the little parts of the stress axis as well. It'll switch off immune activation. It'll switch off the inflammation from allergies and intolerances. It'll switch off the inflammation from our guts. It helps to regulate blood sugar and that sort of stuff. That can be a major stress trigger. If you've got too low blood sugar or too high blood sugar, it's involved in all of those sort of processes of regulating the severity of the stress trigger at the same time as switching off our stress response. So it's really bloody important hormone.
Amazing.
Which is why when we're going through hell and we're tough and we're resilient, our cortisol's typically quite high.
Yeah.
And then people go, oh man, that's your stress. That's how we know you're under stress. You've got this high cortisol. But the thing is, because it keeps us alive, our body can never, ever allow it to run out. Yeah. If it ever runs out, you can't switch off any of this sort of stuff, and it can't do all of its other jobs as well. So what happens, we go through these phases of overactivity or hyper-reactivity, and then we go into these phases of conservation where our body holds out on these hormones. And sometimes we go into these phases of where our adrenals, you can imagine they would become fatigued by pumping out this hormone, or they may become exhausted. And that may manifest as what we call insufficiency. So a lot of these adrenal disorders we talk about, you're either pumping out a heap of cortisol and you're in some sort of anxiety or depression. You know, depression born from anxiety, like where you're up and buzzy. And And then you can move into these phases where you get into that anxiety born from a depression, you get that fatigue, you get exhausted. So we want to talk about these different stages of adrenals that people go through, because most people that are in the exhausted phase have gone through a phase of overactivity. And it's really important to understand that. And we hopefully today, if we can describe the symptoms, so you'll know where you're sitting, and then we can also help people with some strategies to try to get control. That's probably the best way to describe it. Our treatment strategies is never about removing or taking over or blocking. It's all about enhancing the efficiency of a system.
Amazing. And so Elizma,
Thanks, Steve.
Elizma is in clinic all the time, and apparently you can measure these hormones, cortisol and all that sort of thing, using a Dutch test. But what does it actually test for?
Right. So it's a urinary hormone test. Now, you can test hormones either through blood, serum, you can do it through saliva, and you can do it through urine. And it depends on what answers you're looking for, will depend on what kind of test you do. So when you do a blood test for cortisol, it usually will include both your free and your bound cortisol. So cortisol can be bound to cortisol binding hormone, I believe. Yep. So you have to specify in a blood test free cortisol, because if it's just total cortisol, it'll include both free, which is the active cortisol, and the bound, which is the inactive cortisol.
Very much like the hormones, testosterone and those sorts of things too. That can be bound with sex hormone binding globulin.
Yes.
Do they have a test for the free cortisol?
On a blood test?
They do like that. They do free testosterone and free T4 and all these sort of things. Do they do free cortisol, or do they just measure cortisol?
Well, if you specify on a blood test free cortisol, but I'd have to say a lot. I don't really do blood cortisol tests, but the tests that I've seen that other practitioners have asked usually is just morning cortisol. So I'd assume that would be like a combined cortisol, both free and bound. Now, saliva hormone testing is just testing for free hormones, but it can be very much manipulated by any kind of medication that you're taking. So if you are taking pregnenolone, DHEA, or anything like that, then that can give you like these really, funny looking readings. A urinary test, which is like the Dutch test, measures free cortisol again. So it's free hormones that it measures, not free and bound. But I guess the beauty with something like a urine test, as well as a saliva test, is you can measure the rhythms. It's very hard to do that with a blood test unless you're willing to go 4 times to a pathology lab, and I don't think anyone does that. So the saliva and the urine is your best way of kind of looking at the rhythms, because we have spikes of cortisol at certain times of the day, and at other times we want the cortisol to be lower, like at nighttime when we're ready to get to sleep. The urine one, like I said, just doesn't get influenced as much by certain medications and things like that. So you can kind of measure usually what they would do with something like a Dutch test is they'll measure a first morning urine sample, like a waking sample, then like a mid-morning urine sample, an afternoon sample, and a nighttime sample. Cool. And that kind of can give you an idea of, if there's certain times of the day where you kind of spike your cortisol. Now, very typical patterns is, that 3:30-itis that we always talk about. So the flatness of the cortisol, sort of like around, afternoon. Yeah. That's a very typical pattern. Sometimes it's also very typical to see it very low on the waking, which is people who struggle to get out of bed.
Oh, we need to talk about these rhythms then, because that leads even to so with blood, like, and we talked about one of the problems with blood is that you don't know if it's bound and that sort of stuff. There's also that white coat syndrome that for some people that's stress.
You get a needle in your arm.
Yeah, not only is it. For me, the stress is actually getting to the appointment as well, like to go to the pathology and then deal with humans that might be in the way between where I want to be. And then traffic and cars that also want to share my roads. All of those sort of things can change your cortisol reading.
Yes.
And then we can go through and go, well, this is a very inaccurate reading. Even though the blood test might be more accurate, some people believe they're more accurate in regards to the pathology or whatever, but they're not when you're looking at something like cortisol, because it changes the test by the process of doing it. Where urine, if you're doing it at home and that sort of stuff, a little bit awkward if you have to kind of do it in front of other people in a pathology center. But if you're just in the comfort of your own home, peeing in a bucket or whatever, like that would be the closest you'll get as a good cortisol. Plus, the cortisol that's in your urine would have been in there before you went to give the sample.
Yeah.
So it's not as if we're giving a live stressed reading. We're showing what was released in the period up until from when I weed last till now. You know what I mean? So we're seeing a totally different reading. And same with saliva. Saliva tests can be quite stressful for some people as well. Some people even found the anxiety of actually doing the test can actually change cortisol readings. So we always have to take those sort of things into consideration. That's why I like actually doing these the urine tests with other hormones as well. People aren't even going, I'm not being assessed by my stress levels right now. I'm just collecting a urine sample for multiple purposes. So a lot of people have that issues around cortisol and stress, that just the anxiety of the process or what the results will be will change their tests. So with cortisol, we talked about, Elizma was saying some of the things that we see on the results. You get low in the morning, high, where we're getting these flat spots, we're getting these low cortisol. So what's supposed to happen with our cortisol rhythm? Normally, first thing in the morning, big surge of cortisol. Wakes you up, all shite and briny, ready to go. You know, I always remember in the
Shite and briny.
no, same thing. Bright and shiny, shite and briny. It depends. I went for the
I
pirate
thought you were
version.
joking. I thought it was a funny joke.
Yeah, it's something my dad said. Ever since we were kids, he's always said, "You all shite. Look at you. You look all shite and briny." And I was like, "Oh, thanks, Dad." Yeah, I do. I feel chipper. You know. But anyway. What was I talking about? Yeah, so you wake up all shite and briny with a big surge of cortisol in the morning, blocks off all your serotonin, wakes you up. I always remember the movies of people, the nurses or whatever, those moles when they think you're dying, you know. Wake up, good morning, you bastard. Whip open the curtain, get that sunshine in, get that adrenaline surge and dopa, whatever's going to be driving and waking you up in the morning. So you get a big cortisol surge in the morning, and that's supposed to taper off through the day. So then at night you go into a really deep, low trough of cortisol. So high all day to be wide awake, really deep at night to go into a deep sleep. Okay, and it's such an important understanding for the adrenals, because what we're going to be talking about a lot now is like being awake and how great it feels to be awake all day, and then how to get into a really deep sleep. And some of the problems that create these adrenal exhaustion is that inability for the cortisol to drop off at night, and then you become exhausted, so you don't get the spike in the morning.
So I'll give you a hypothetical. What if they don't get the spike in the morning and they don't get the drop, they just get like a flat line all day? How would you feel?
Well, typically, that's a good point. So most of us actually, not many people are normal, okay? Not many people have that classical, beautiful cortisol surge in the morning and a nice deep trough at night, because most are exposed to some sort of stress and inflammation and gut problems or allergies and intolerances and that sort of thing. So what happens is inflammation, pain, allergies, intolerances, lack of oxygen, blood sugar problems and all that sort of stuff, a lot of that shit's worse at night when you're asleep, especially if you've been going through a cortisol trough, because if cortisol is your main anti-inflammatory and cortisol's going flat at night, or your inflammation picks up, or your immune, that's why most people die just before they wake up. You know, like in real early in the morning in the cortisol trough, because a lot of aspects of aging on these cardiovascular events and that sort of stuff are inflammatory and immune triggered. So as the cortisol drops the lowest, those sort of things can get worse. So what's supposed to happen is at night we get no cortisol, so we can go into a deep sleep. But if you're inflamed, if you're allergic, if you've been eating intolerances, if your blood sugar's all over the place, if you're getting poor circulation or anemic or something like that, even if you've got low blood volume and dehydrated, all those sort of things will manifest as a stress response that cortisol can help to fix. So what happens is instead of getting a trough at night, you get this stupid piss weak trickle that runs through all night and just stops you from getting a deep, refreshing sleep. Now, you will see with these urine tests, we're often collecting a 24-hour, trying to get a good understanding of 24-hour cortisol. So if someone has got this annoying trickle of cortisol at night when they should have none, they're actually exposed to more cortisol at night. That's a high level of cortisol.
Yeah, okay.
Relatively too much cortisol at night. But then they don't have enough cortisol. So what happens? You can't be high cortisol all day and all night. So what happens is it goes, right, I need to conserve, I need to hold back. I'm not going to give this person that cortisol surge just to wake them up, and they're probably just going to go and injure themselves or train. I'm going to flatten this person. I'm never going to give them the energy they need to get up and go out and get in amongst the stress. In fact, I'm going to give them a little trickle of cortisol all day, just enough to manage their inflammation, knowing that I have to maintain the same amount of cortisol for the whole 24 hours because they're going to need it at night. Now, those people over a 24-hour period may be exposed to more cortisol and actually be showing up as overactive adrenals. but they may be manifesting the symptoms of adrenal insufficiency all day because they're not really assessing their symptoms at night.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you've got inadequate cortisol through the day, typically you'll get sensitive to glare, you get sensitive to bright lights, you're quite thirsty, you can't hold salt and everything into your body, you might be getting dizzy, inability to switch off stress, inability to switch off inflammation, inability to switch off immune activity. You never really pick up that energy, so you're kind of feeling flat all day. But then at night, so you can't sleep. Those people say things like, the tireder I get, the harder it is to get a good night's sleep.
So they're too tired to sleep.
But they were telling me I've got adrenal exhaustion because I'm so flat all day. But then I'll measure their cortisol in their urine over 24 hours and it's actually above normal. Actually more than the person that has energy all day and a big deep sleep at night.
Yeah.
These people that complain of adrenal exhaustion, adrenal fatigue, it's only through that daylight period, but at night they've got too much, and over a 24-hour they're exposed to too much cortisol.
Jeez.
And then that creates its own problem.
Yeah.
So there's that group, and they're slightly above. Often they'll say, like fibromyalgia, they get the pain, they get the aches, they get the fatigue, but they just can't sleep. And then what happens is that can go into a further phase of conservation because still in a 24-hour period, they're exposed to more cortisol than the body's capable of pumping out. So then it'll drop down to be below basal, where they're going, right, how much cortisol can I give this, but how much can we get away with? A really low trickle during the day, just enough to maintain other cortisol functions we haven't even mentioned yet, such as maintaining blood volume. What did you say? Fuck it, we'll talk about it later. So the other things that cortisol does don't get done. So, and then these people get described as like hypersomnia.
Yes.
No matter how much I sleep, I can't wake up. That's when we're talking about adrenal insufficiency, adrenal fatigue, is when they'll be flattened all night and then wake up totally unrefreshed.
Yes.
And they don't have enough cortisol to maintain, to stop immune overactivity and inflammatory overactivity and all that sort of shit, and even to maintain blood volume and hold salt and water into their body. So you'll see a lot of people, sorry, I waffled a lot there, but it's important to understand that most people go from a stage of hyperreactivity with cortisol while they're trying to address the cause of their stress.
Yep.
When the cause of their stress does not get resolved, or it's still there, or gets worse and worse and worse, they'll then go into a phase of conservation. But in that phase of conservation, they're often pumping out more cortisol than the people that are feeling great.
Wow.
And then they'll go into a phase of that becoming exhausted. So what the hell do the textbooks call it? Because they just say adrenal insufficiency.
In the literature, they call it flatlining, which is like a good description of how they feel.
Yeah,
They're just like, they're zombied, and then at night they can't sleep, so they're zombied at night.
Is it flatlining above basal, or is it flatlining below basal?
Both, depending on the literature. Let's go back to that first stage you mentioned where you've got the elevated cortisol throughout the day.
Stop freaking me out, Steve.
Just a little bit flat like that, and then at night it doesn't go down. Now, Elizma, you're in practice. These people are tired all day and they can't sleep at night. How do you approach a difficult patient like that? Because they've got high cortisol at night, but low in the day, and high. So it's kind of like it should be up and down, but it's not. It's just flatlining. How do you approach that sort of in clinic?
Well, I guess the typical approach is to use, and I'm not saying that I necessarily do that, but is to use adaptogens and things like that.
An adaptogen is?
An adaptogen is a herb that helps the body adapt to stressors. And stressors, like we've been talking about, can be anything from emotional stress to inflammation, infections, exercise. Food intolerances is another big one. So when I see someone who's got that kind of above the line, flat line kind of pattern, I always look at the pattern. So if I find a bit of a zigzag pattern, I'll start looking at blood sugar issues or food intolerances. Because if you have a food intolerance and you eat a meal, then you're likely to get a cortisol spike. In the next reading would be like a spike. So you look at the meal before the spike and see maybe there's something that they're eating, something with gluten or dairy or whatever else, that could be stimulating this cortisol spike. That's if you get a slight pattern. But if it's, whether it's flatline or slight pattern, I always look in like, what is causing this? Is it because they've got some kind of gut dysbiosis? Is there some kind of relationship stress? Because by that time, it's been going on for a long time. Because the first pattern, like Matt pointed out, is you get a very hyper response, where it's actually higher than what it's supposed to be. It's still following the pattern, but it's way, way higher. So they're in their hyper, and then over time, it kind of drops. So for me, look at the cause. Is it because of overtraining? Is it because they've got gut dysbiosis? Because Candida is a classic one. Candida, produces that interleukin 6, which binds to the corticoreceptor hormone receptors, I believe, and then that can trigger a stress response as if you are fleeing from a danger. Except there is no obvious stress response. It's just from something like
interleukin 6. Interleukin 6 was one thing I learned that it was the one thing that confirmed naturopathy for me, the generalist theory rather than specialist. Okay. And what actually happened, I was working for another company at the time, and I was doing a lecture, and I actually was lecturing to doctors at the Sydney Uni.
Yep.
And they were, the company, and that, they're a hard crowd. They don't like us. And so basically we're in there, and they were talking about I had multiple specialists in there saying, no, you're very wrong. So then what I did, I challenged the people within the room and I used interleukin 6 as an example. And I said, of all the specialists in the room here, who's aware of interleukin 6? Every one of them put their hands up. And I said, okay, so the gastroenterologist, what does interleukin 6 mean to you? And they, it's innate inflammation, and we use that as a marker and that. And I said, does it trigger like a stress response? And they go, oh, no, it's an inflammatory mediator. And I went to the anxiety people and said, what do you know about interleukin 6? What happens with interleukin 6 when we actually get that exposed to our nerves? And they go, oh, yeah, it's a major trigger for anxiety. And then so we went through the group, the dermatologist, went through everyone. Everyone had a story about interleukin 6. And I said, now, have you made the connection yet? This is all happening at once within the body. Yeah. Which comes first? Yeah. And then all the doctors started fighting amongst themselves of which specialist group was most important. and then I even just threw in, because we were doing a seminar talking about gut health and that too, and I basically explained to them, I said, well, what if I was to tell you that, even lipopolysaccharide, the bacteria fragment, the good or bad bugs will trigger interleukin 6. And what if I can put an interleukin 6 on any part of the body and trigger a stress response? What actually is it? Is it a neurotransmitter? Is it an immune chemical? Is it an inflammatory marker? What the hell is interleukin 6? And then basically everyone just gone, oh shit, it's very much complicated, isn't it? And then we realised the generalist term is much more important than the specialist. And when you look at things like this, everyone is different. You might see a cortisol spike. One person might be blood sugar. Actually, one person, and each time they get a cortisol spike, it might be a different cause. It's hard to do that. We look for patterns typically that we can resolve, but blood sugar, inflammation, food intolerances, eating on the run, who knows what it could be. So we go through, we got to try to, that's why you treat people, not diseases.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because otherwise what you're doing is you're giving everyone you're treating adrenal glands. Yeah. You're either giving them uppers in the morning to get the cortisol up, giving you downers at night to get the cortisol down. We recreate that wave. But if you don't treat the person and their individual triggers for their stress reaction, then it's different every time.
It's terrible. Now, interleukin 6, just so you know, is you can measure it in your blood as C-reactive protein. It stimulates the liver to release that protein. And very recently, there's a drug called toxicizumab, which is an anti-interleukin.
You made that up.
Toxicizumab. I wish I made it up. I'd have a patent. I'd be worth a fortune. Anyway, this medical drug is anti-interleukin 6, and that's all it does. And it's
What's it called again?
Toxicizumab.
How the hell does he say that over and over again?
Slower?
Toxicizumab.
Okay.
The Zumabs are a class of anti... Oh, no. The Zumabs are anti-interleukin.
You said that last time. Toxicizumab.
Toxicizumab.
That's why you didn't want me to keep on that story. The whole time I'm telling that story, you're sitting there, toxicizumab, toxicizumab. Finish your story before I forget how to say this word.
Yeah, say
it again.
Toxicizumab.
He hasn't messed it up once.
It's because of the name, but I didn't name it. I wish I owned the patent of it. It's a fantastic drug that's used widely in medicine. When I say fantastic, it's got horrendous side effects, but it
sounds fantastic drug.
It's got some. So all it does is knock out interleukin 6, and it's used by all the specialtons. All of them.
Oh, the what?
All the specialists.
So you can't say specialist. You called them specialtons.
Specialtons.
But you had toxicizumab. No worries. Just nailed it. I fucking nailed it. That's actually a very easy word to say.
It's a pretty easy word. Because Zumab is the class of drugs that it comes from. So you just got to think of toxicity. Yeah.
Toxicity.
So interleukin-6 is a really broad one used throughout the whole. Inflammation stuffs your brain up. It drives up cortisol, which is a great anti-inflammatory hormone, as you know. And it also balances sugar levels. So if you've got low, like we go to the second stage, the one where they're right down the bottom, what happens to these people?
I'm going to give them interleukin-6.
Yes.
It's going to spike it up again.
It up.
See, and that's the problem. They got into that because they could not manage the overwhelming triggers. Now, this also goes back, I know we're getting a little bit off topic here, but this is something that it's very important that people understand. A lot of this gut health stuff, a lot of people are all about probiotics, prebiotics. Now, a very simple thing I want you to understand, lipopolysaccharide triggers interleukin-6 and inflammatory processes so powerfully. Now, lipopolysaccharide is a bit of a bacterial cell wall fragment from dead, busted up bugs and live bugs as they're getting attacked. It's the marker that our immune system uses to know that we're potentially getting infected by something. And our body does not care if we think it's a probiotic or an infectious bug. The main difference between probiotics and infectious bugs is that the probiotics typically don't make us sick, but our immune system doesn't give a shit. It still smashes it. So what happens is most of these problems, dysbiosis, SIBO, which is a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Dysbiosis is the wrong types and the wrong numbers. So a lot of our gut problems are overgrowth, candidiasis. So whether you're parasite, whatever, we got overgrowth of bugs. The parasite, bad example actually, because it's not liberating lipopolysaccharide. But anyway, forget about parasites. They're just big worms. Forget about it. So the rest of the bugs, their overgrowth liberates all of this lipopolysaccharide that triggers this inflammatory reaction. You go throwing down all these probiotics and prebiotics, you're increasing the amount of bugs in your guts. If you don't cycle your diet and carbs in and out, you're going to overgrow these bugs in your guts. You're going to have a constant source of inflammatory lipopolysaccharide coming from your gut. That your body cannot ignore.
Yeah, and your body has to therefore secrete cortisol as much as it can.
Yep.
And remember, your gut doesn't go to sleep. The bugs are still there. So it's continually pumping out all this cortisol, and you're going to get weird cortisol results, which changes your blood sugar levels, which means they're going to be fatigued all day. So they're going to be taking stimulants in the morning. A lot of people need coffee in the morning. And then at night, they're going to have to take a sleeping tablet.
So for these people that are overactive with their adrenals, the bit that leads into it, these people that might be anxious and that sort of stuff. I mean, the medical model and a lot of the naturopathic way of treating it these days is to suppress them, sedate them. Let's give them an antidepressant. Let's give them a natural or chemical straitjacket. We'll use things like Gabaenergic and GABA agents. What GABA agents do is they reduce the amount of signals getting to the hypothalamus. So they don't treat any of the problems, but they just stop the signals getting to that. So quieten it down. So if there's 10 signals coming through, one might get through. So therefore we respond less. Okay, that's not treating any of the causes. So if you're a naturopath out there and you're just treating GABAenergic agents and you're suppressing their anxiety, that's cool to do, but it's only one small step in a protocol unless you're treating the cause. So that's why I love naturopathic formulations, because if we have a herb, we look at a herb that might have a mild GABAenergic effect, but then it also has a synergistic action as an anti-inflammatory or an antioxidant, or protects us from toxic exposure or aids oxygenation or something like that. That might be one of our causes of our stress. You don't need such a powerful sedation because you're actually removing the burden.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about naturopath. And then the same strategy when you asked Elizma before, and I probably interrupted and started this waffle, that how do we do this? How do we pick them up in the morning? Well, often we don't. By default, they got into that exhaustion because they were too high for too long.
Right.
All we have to do is push them down at night.
Yes.
If you can flatten it at night. Now, how do we flatten at night? We can use magnesiums, melatonins, sedatives, carvers, whatever we want. We can flatten them at night. But if they have ongoing inflammation, if they're anemic, if they got blood sugar problems, they're going to be back up again.
Yes.
Well, the cortisol will anyway. So this is our challenge.
But isn't it interesting? We're talking about it in terms of cortisol and all of that, but it also goes back to that old age, like the common sense of improve the sleep, the energy is better during the day, right? it's kind of like a no-brainer, unless it's obviously a root cause like inflammation, blood sugar issues and stuff like that. But yeah, you improve the sleep, and then the cortisol, there's more cortisol for the next day.
Makes sense, eh?
Yeah.
And you know that you can't do that if you've got pain.
Yeah.
Like if you've got inflammation, like pain. You know, like just stupid shit, like a frozen shoulder or something.
Yeah.
That's all it takes is to keep you up all night, just that inability to get comfortable.
little
Could
bit-
have too much light in your room.
Yep. Shuts off melatonin.
Yeah, you can't have melatonin. And then, I mean, you can supplement with melatonin and it will force that cortisol down. But if the reason why your cortisol was high at night is not addressed, then it's just a management process and gradually you're going to get worse and worse.
And it's incredible you mentioned pain, because one of the most common treatments of pain is opioids.
Yeah.
And they actually suppress the entire adrenal system.
Yeah, right.
Even a single dose, and this is paper.
And prednisone?
Prednisone
Because I mean,
does
a lot
too.
of them they talk about so prednisone is a drug version of cortisol. So that's a good example, actually. Yeah, they made drugs out of cortisol to treat inflammation and autoimmune, called prednisone.
Yeah, and if prednisone needs to be weaned off at about 1 milligram a day.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, if you just go put someone on a high dose of prednisolone, say 30 milligrams for 2 weeks or more.
5 years?
Yeah.
From the
I
ages
know,
of 2
I
to
know.
7?
I didn't want to mention your but what happens if you then take the drug out, the person can die because their cortisol levels are so suppressed. Now go back to the opioids, they suppress it even after a single dose.
Yeah.
So if you have some endo,
what?
A single dose
Is that because they block the pain or is that because they...
blocks the whole HPA axis.
Oh, wow.
So this is scary, and this is a paper.
So that is your chemical straitjacket.
It is your chemical. So endone, 30 milligrams is a pretty high dose actually. But if you have a single reduction of that, it reduces cortisol by half, from the average of 275 in the morning to 124.
Wow.
It
And
just
that's
cuts it in
not
half.
just by taking away the pain signals that's
Single
resulting
dose,
it.
just one dose of it. Another scary study I found with tramadol, 15 milligrams. Now, the average dose of tramadol is about 100 milligrams 3 times a day.
It's true.
So only 15 milligrams suppresses basal cortisol levels, and this is a very one they take very long term. Like this study was 3 years. So you can take this drug quite long term as far as the opioids go, because it's also serotonergic.
And you think about these drugs, like you said, they're prescribed.
Very often.
Prescribed very often, but for something that should be getting managed or treated. You know, like it's for a pain.
Yeah.
It's for a pain or an inflammatory condition. And if we were to work out how to eradicate the pain and the inflammatory condition, then they wouldn't need the medications, and then that would break the cycle.
Well, it's not only opioids, of course. It's your steroids, as you mentioned, even lipid-lowering drugs like the statin drugs.
So cortisol,
Yep.
all of our hormones, they're all made out of cholesterol.
Yep.
Is that why? So if we stop cholesterol...
One of the reasons why. But actually, the other reason is that it impairs synthesis of cortisol just by the actual adrenal cortex. It's one of its side effects.
Yeah, right.
It stuffs up a few other things too, like CoQ10 stuffs up that production.
So
as
we're
well.
talking about statin, HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors.
That's right.
So they stop vitamin D,
Yep.
CoQ10, all your other hormones,
Cortisol.
including
Bile.
testosterone and everything.
bile.
Bile acids.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
Because the enzyme, the one you mentioned, 3-hydroxy-3-methylglucosylcoenzyme reductase. You like that one? That enzyme makes a whole host of things.
I was sitting here trying to think of Temesizupan or whatever that one was again. I've already lost it.
But that's the problem with it. So also other drugs too, like anti-prostate drugs. So if you've got an elderly gentleman who's taking anti-prostate drugs that inhibit some of the chemicals associated with that, their cortisol levels suppress. So let's go back to the statins. That's the most commonly medicated one. Usually they've got a heart disease. And
Isn't it like the most common drug in
It is the
Australia?
most common one. Yeah, Lipitor. And that one simply blocks the cortisol, so they feel crap. But these are the people that need to feel good to exercise.
So what's
they
this
can
paper,
rehabilitate.
Steve?
Oh, this paper.
Is it
I'll read the
specifically
title.
on Lipitor or?
No, it says novel medications including inducing adrenal insufficiency.
Yeah,
like I got my
right.
glass on it. So I thought it was. So there's lots of medications that do it. And this is a paper published in Nature Reviews Endocrinology. I'll give the paper later, and that was published about a year ago.
So it's not just your opinion. You're not just being
No,
an
it's
arse.
not just my opinion. So it's a really interesting thing. So there's many other drugs.
That's crazy, yeah. It's the most commonly prescribed drug in Australia.
Yep.
An interesting thing too, if you consider coenzyme Q10's role in the body is to get oxygen into the tissue. A lot of people complain the side effect of statins, rhabdomyolysis and muscular fatigue, it all manifests as a lack of oxygen into the tissue.
Yep.
If we consider that, what would normally happen if someone gets a signal from their feet or something saying that I don't get enough oxygen when I'm sleeping at night, what would normally happen is your body would slightly increase your blood pressure, increase your blood volume to push that oxygen across. And it uses cortisol to do that. So if it's actually inhibiting cortisol, then you get less oxygen. That's a major cause for restless legs, did you know?
Absolutely.
So this lack of oxygen into the tissues, if you can't maintain blood volume and blood pressure and all that sort of stuff to push that oxygen across at rest, you need muscle contractions.
Yes.
As soon as they stop moving, they can't get oxygen in.
And one of the most common side effects of statins is muscle pain due to CoQ10 deficiency and what
And if you think about through evolution, like a lack of oxygen into a part of your body and pain may signal that something just bit your leg off. So typically that would trigger a stress response.
Big time.
Now, your body can't afford to wait to see if your leg's missing or if you're on a medication because you could bleed to death. So it has to manifest these responses. That's where I mentioned earlier, I briefly mentioned time travel.
Yes.
It's very important, Steve.
Hi, I'm listening.
That's how we met.
Exactly. Time travel. I
I went back 200 years
200
in
years.
time, and there was Steve.
Still around today too.
Still there.
Look at this.
Well
And then
preserved.
200 years later, here he is.
Look good for
Run into him
250.
again.
251 actually.
Yeah. It's like Yoda.
I'll tell you what, the second most common drug, one of them is the SSRIs. You've all heard of those.
Yeah, I have.
Selective serotonin
I don't
reuptake
have an
inhibitors.
armrest. I just went to lean on an armrest. So I almost fell off my chair.
You wanted to look good.
I did. I went like, tell me about your SSRIs.
Well, they also inhibit cortisol. They stuff up your ACTH and the effects on the cortisol.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting because this is crazy because so the way cortisol can often wake us up in the morning is by the blocking of serotonin activity.
It does.
Yeah, so then when you get a drug that preserves and increases serotonin activity, it goes back and blocks cortisol.
Yep.
Oh, man,
absolutely.
the body's amazing.
Yeah.
Man.
Amazing. And so that's another terrible side effect of these things, and people can't sleep and they feel shit. And it also stuffs up their libido, all sorts of things that causes with the SSRIs. They're terrible drug. And they've got quite a long half-life. So you don't just take it, feel happy, and then it wears off. It stays for a long time.
And weird stuff too. Like, I mean, you can go get down the rabbit hole with this stuff because the SSRIs, one of the other side effects of them is constipation. It slows down that bowel transit time, exposes you to more lipopolysaccharide. Yeah, just weird little links. You just go round and round in circles and you can create all these links. What else you got? Because I still got to tell my time travel story.
I want to hear the time travel story. Look, the other ones here are a little bit less.
So statins, opioids, SSRI style antidepressants, prednisolone.
Prednisolone is classically one that we're all aware of. And also other like aldosterone inhibitors. So like people who've got hypertension and they inhibit the aldosterone. Aldosterone is another adrenal hormone that hangs on to sodium, so we keep our blood pressure up. So if you have problems with aldosterone, your blood pressure goes all over the place, and aldosterone is an adrenal hormone.
Yeah, right.
So if you have if you take a drug that's an antihypertensive and it's that class of antihypertensive, then it can stuff up your other adrenal hormones as well.
Wow.
So it's a real nightmare.
And then you see the links, because you go into a medication like that to regulate blood pressure. And then the end result is parts of your body miss out on oxygen.
Yes.
So send a message goes back to your heart saying, man, you're not doing your job very well. Maybe you should beat harder. So then their heart rate goes up and then their blood pressure goes up from a different mechanism. It's
terrible.
Yeah.
And you take the average 60 to 70-year-old bloke who's a bit overweight, who needs to reduce his blood pressure. He goes on this drug. He feels like crap, so he doesn't exercise, so his heart doesn't get any better.
Yeah.
But also, the elderly are usually inflamed. They've got arthritis and they've got all kinds of stuff. So now you're suppressing, a cortisol production through things like the prostate medications and the statins.
Lipids,
and so now
the medications,
now they have to take a painkiller because their cortisol is not regulating inflammation in their body.
Give them an opioid.
Oh, and now let's just screw the whole system up when we remind everyone what happens after menopause and andropause, that your adrenal gland, out of cholesterol, the same raw material that is going to make cortisol now has to make DHEA, pregnenolone, progesterone, testosterone, and estrogen. So your adrenal gland and a bit of your fat cells, they have to then pick up and make all these hormones. Now, all hormones are anti-inflammatory. So as your hormones drop, your poor adrenal gland has to decide, am I going to use these resources to make all of these other hormones that are going to maintain arteries, bone, muscle, and that sort of stuff, or am I going to pump it out to cortisol, which is the most efficient way of switching off my inflammation? And if you're running low on reserves, and if you're on these sort of medications and that sort of stuff, then so what happens? So
the cortisol steal.
So we often use in with your testing, we'll often look at I haven't forgotten about my time travel, don't let me forget. With your testing, we often will look at cortisol versus DHEA to see where someone's adrenals at, whether it's confused, dysregulated. Do you want to explain a bit of that, Elizma? Because you do a lot of this pathology testing.
The ideal ratio between DHEA and cortisol is 5 to 6 to 1 DHEA. That's kind of like your ideal ratios. But sometimes you'll have higher DHEA than cortisol, and which is a very common pattern that we see in panic disorders. And this is kind of where there's a reverse steroidogenesis of cholesterol to DHEA. It's kind of going away from cortisol towards DHEA.
Yeah.
Then you can get the opposite pattern where you have your higher cortisol, lower DHEA, which is more your inflammatory kind of pattern. So it's only really when you have all of those low that you're really looking at severe adrenal insufficiency. But
they're made from the adrenals,
Yes.
from the same stuff. So if your adrenal's exhausted, it wouldn't be capable of pumping out a high level of anything.
It's just putting resources into different places.
The other time you see the high DHEA is in insulin resistant syndromes because we do get that backlog of all the androgens in that insulin resistant syndrome. Things like acne, polycystic ovarian syndrome, the bearded woman case in point, those sort of things.
Now, DHEA is the most abundant hormone in the body, just for people who don't know what it is, basically. So it's the precursor to a lot of your sex hormones, your testosterones and your progesterones and estradiols and all the estrogens, the three of them.
And you're better off testing that first thing in the morning too, aren't you? Because you're looking at those. I always did the cortisol, DHEA in the mornings.
Yeah, you do it in the morning. And DHEA is also known as the youth hormone. I mean, there's a lot of anti-aging clinics that use DHEA because it declines as you get older. So
a lot of them use the 7-keto DHEA though, that doesn't convert. So DHEA can convert through to testosterone and androgens, and in that instance, it can have some side effects, especially in women, such as male pattern or male style.
Because it's androgenic.
Male pattern style baldness. What do you call it in
it'd
women?
be male pattern baldness in women.
In a woman.
Yeah, male pattern.
Because it's the male pattern.
It's a male pattern.
Yeah, I'll show you if you want.
Yeah, anyway, so they get head like Steve.
Yes.
Poor buggers. They'll often get a lot of abdominal. They lose their bum and gain a belly. Is one of the other side effects of too much androgens in the women there. And so what they invented is because 7-keto DHEA is good for anti-inflammatory, good for autoimmune, and kind of helps with fat loss. So they invented the 7-keto DHEA in a form that would not convert to have that androgenic effect, so it could stay as a more potent anti-inflammatory. The reason why I'm mentioning it, we have a lot of customers within the sports world. A classic mistake made in androgen boosting supplements is they use the 7-keto DHEA. And the 7-keto DHEA was specifically formulated to not have that side effect of androgenic action. So if you see a test booster with 7-keto DHEA, it's probably wrong. Yeah.
Amazing.
They mix it with diaspartic acid usually, which makes estrogen. So it's like, I don't know what the hell's going on here.
One question for you. Time travel. What was it? I want to hear about it.
Oh, diddle-oo.
Time travel. I don't want to hear it.
No, your body doesn't know when you're imagining. So this is the thing. It's like your body has no idea if it's actually happening or if it's happening in your mind or in your body. And I want people to go back after they listen to this podcast to get more information out of this. Listen to the podcast we had with Ken Ware and the podcast we had with Dr. Don Wood. Both of those guys, for totally different reasons, said almost exactly the same thing. Both of them explained that you can never rewind, you can never repeat, you can never redo. The body does not go backwards. The body can't go back and reset. Nothing's about recalibrating. It's all about calibrating back into the here and now. So with Ken Ware, he'd always talk about your posture. He says, so during a survival response, your traps might come up, your shoulders might go forward to protect your heart and everything. You might go onto the balls of your feet ready to run. Your head will go forward. Your posture, your center of gravity and everything changes. Those peripheral signals go back to your brain to tell your body that you are actually going through stress right now. So if you get into the habit of maintaining that posture, or if you train badly, you train with angst, you train with aggression, you're locking up your traps, you're frowning, you got your angry music and all that sort of stuff, your body does not know that you're actually having fun and taking time out for yourself right now. It actually thinks you're surviving and probably going to die. And so it manifests all those same sort of things. So that whole process of training to not reinforce a negative posture or a negative mental state, actually the training to not recalibrate, but to calibrate in the here and now. I've been through these traumas. I've got these allergies. I've got these problems. I've got these shoulders. I've got these things. And actually training to, in a posture and a mental state that does not manifest angst, stress, and anxiety will actually calibrate your body in the here and now with everything you've been through, everything you've gone, that I am capable of standing tall, proud, solid, confident, no angst, no fear, no panic. In right now, in the now, I am capable of functioning. And you can actually calibrate your body to be accepting all of that stuff that's happening right now as part of you, that is not killing you, that you've been through, that actually made you stronger. And look at me now. With all of that sort of stuff, I can sit here. And it's weirder stuff he teaches you. You know, like, you can imagine doing those seated pulley row things.
Yep.
The simple, think about this. When you do the seated pulley row, do you push up against the pad or do you just stand in your own space, confident? Do you need support? Are you getting pulled forward? Are you off balance? Or am I sitting there, feet solidly planted on the ground, traps down, no frown, in total control?
Geez, I go up against the pad. I'm worried now.
So a lot of people might go up and they'll be like, angst, I'm going to pull forward. You have no control.
Cable, I'm going to break.
So who's controlling you? Are you doing the thing, or is it controlling you? Are you fighting against something, or are you controlling something? So a lot of it was just, where are your feet? Where are your frowns? What are your traps doing? Now do it. And then all of a sudden, as pain goes, all these things go. It's the freakiest thing. Yeah. Now, Dr. Don was saying exactly the same thing. You've got these memories that go around in your head of trauma, and we all get triggers of things that trigger you to go, oh, fuck, there's that, that anxiety or something like that. What he teaches people to do is replay the memory, but take away the emotion from it. Take away the fear, because your body doesn't respond to the memory, it responds to your emotion attached to the memory. So he actually told you how to calibrate in the here and now with all the shit you've been through, all the traumas and all that horrendous stuff. And he used to use strategies like he'd get people to talk about this memory but not talk about it, just say flow, the word flow. Yeah, flow, and keep going it over, and he'd bust it all up, mess it all up. He would confuse the body into making it realize that event is not happening right now. Because if you got that imagination of that memory that is so full on, you can get the smell, you can get the noises, you can get the fear, you know exactly how you felt. Your body does not know that you're not going through it again. And if you're one of those people that hasn't been able to move on from a trauma and you go through it, that memory all the time, you need to actually change that memory. What I used to do in my clinic, it was a silly thing. This was before, what I used to do is, I don't know where it came from, but I used to get people to talk about their memories and that. And when I first started talking, I told them that, imagine that you're at the movie cinema and this memory is like this big movie and you're sitting in the front row, and you're like, wow, this is so full on. And these people are kind of manifest. They start to get a bit stressed and anxious. And I said, and as I see them getting stressed and anxious, I said, but it's not a movie screen. I said, it's a little screen and you control it. And I said, grab it and bring it down, and I'll make them grab the movie screen in their mind and bring it down to make it like a mobile phone, but they can just look at it, and then they can turn the volume up and down, they can zoom in on stuff, they can start it, they can screw it. So I get them to basically take control of their memory and the emotion attached to that memory, take it from something big and overwhelming and freaky into something small and little that they can control. Turn it on and off and do whatever they want, share it with their friends. So we talk about these weird little analogies on the phone, and that it was all purely for a strategy to get these people to talk about their memory without the emotion. And it was all about going through these people to realize that I've been through that. I can talk about it without actually manifesting those survival responses. And then the moment these people, all of a sudden, they're like, cool. And then if you consider that we got posture as well, so that's why the stuff that we've learned from Ken Ware and Don Wood together can actually stop this time traveling. And that's because when I say time traveling, people that focus on the past or anxious about the future. If you're living in the now, those things don't exist.
Yeah, they don't.
And so if you're when you're training, when you're exercising, whenever you're doing something, you think about it in the now. Remember when we used to do seminars?
Yep.
Oh man, do seminars. and it was full on like I'd played a game of footy after. I would sweat like you wouldn't believe. Yeah. My whole body, I'd be so dissociated and dizzy. I'd have my jaw would be sore. I'd be frowning. I'd have these traps. I'd be up. I was a mess after these things. You would never know doing the seminars because I enjoyed it. I'd convince myself it's fine. My body would manifest these major stress responses. Now what happens, and I used to get panic attacks and a lot of crazy sweating and anxiety style panic attacks and everything like that. And now what I can do is actually, when I'm doing it, it's funny, as I feel these things happening, my brain goes, are my heels on the ground? And then I push my heels into the ground. And then as I actually push my heels to the ground, I actually feel my hips change. Then everything changes. Then I think my trap's gone. Am I actually frowning and leaning forward? So I actually manifest a totally different posture and it breaks the cycle.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, so
it's attitudes. And you know, like you and I run, and you know, running is stressful for some.
It's for me.
Yeah. Well, and yet it's the
I'm going to get
exact
scissors tattooed on my arm, so you can't run with scissors.
Yeah. But like, so isn't that amazing? It's the exact same thing. Running stressful for some, but it's relaxing for others.
Yeah.
So it's not about the stress that gets you; it's how you react to the stress.
Yeah.
So you're 100% correct about seminaring because I learned to enjoy it.
Yeah,
you know,
you do love it though. You were a busker.
Yeah,
you play in a band.
Yeah,
sometimes he just wanders around. Say, look at me.
But that, so it's like public speaking can be stressful for some people, but for others it can be, you know, relaxing. I think there was a survey done where people thought that it would be more stressful to speak at their funeral than to be in the box dead.
Yeah,
you know, that's how stressed people get about public speaking. But you know,
that's pretty messed up. I mean, that in itself gives you a little bit of perspective. Like if you actually just think about only that, like, would I rather just do this public speaking right now or die?
Yeah.
Just do the public speaking.
Just do it, wouldn't you? Because you live another day. And the beautiful thing about stress is that your body can look at the same stress that used to stress you and you can change your attitude to that stress. And maybe, as you're saying, but with the work that Ken's done is amazing, but change your physiology to the stress, reduce the cortisol, you know, and actually change the way you are. You're not just stuck in it forever.
Yeah.
Amazing, isn't it? So you can adapt to it.
But even like with running, it could be your posture during running, right? So I found when I didn't, you know...
You're referring to Steve, but he had ankylosing spondylitis. It's not his fault.
Yeah, I've got a shitty run style.
Oh, do you?
Oh, yeah.
And his nipples, they flap everywhere.
All over the place.
Weird.
Yeah, it's bad after a little sports bra.
Yeah.
Just a little one.
Little one. He used to wear nipple guards, but when they sweat, they come off.
Yeah, can't do that.
All right, well, that probably throws my whole theory out. But yeah, I had this thing, you know, if you have poor posture, so a lot of people like run forward, right?
Yeah.
Which is that in that
run
stress.
Forward. What are you suggesting?
Lean forward.
No,
lean
forward.
I thought you meant you should be running backwards or something.
No, that's that leaning forward kind of thing. And so if you learn how to run straight up, and it's like literally just your legs kind of moving, propelling your body forward. There's a huge shift in that sympathetic and sympathetic response.
That's how people like Dean Carnensis can run for 48 hours solid.
Yeah, and it's the resistance, hey? So if you've got all this tension, I mean, if you're trying to move forward and you've got all these opposing muscles holding you back, like that'd have to waste a lot. I think that's my reason why I'm a bad runner. And I don't do it.
Yeah, but again, you might be great in the gym. You know,
I'm great in the gym, Steve.
So, hey, you do your work out a fair bit, so you know.
Not really. I'm actually not really great anyway, to be honest.
But it's horses for courses, and it's different stresses.
Now that's where I am great on a racetrack.
On the racetrack.
Sorry, I'll stop interrupting now.
No, that's all right, because it is all about stress and how your body adapts to it and how your body reacts to it, and it can be the same stress but different situations. So there's not one thing as a stressful event.
Yeah.
Because if running is great for you but stresses you out, then that's not a stressful event, is it?
Yeah.
It's subjective.
Yeah, exactly.
So I love that. The body can adapt to that. And as you say, with what Ken does, and he teaches you how to adapt to a stressful
rugby
situation.
league and that footy for me was so much fun.
Yeah.
And it was not stressful. And like you used to just you take a massive run up to get to full speed. You got a line up of people there that hate you and want to smash you. And you just you're going to run straight at them and you just love it. You do it for the collision. And then unless you feel absolutely broken and destroyed at the end of it, you're extremely disappointed in your performance. It was just and the high that you get from being destroyed was amazing.
That would stress me out.
Yeah, see, I can't identify with that.
No.
Yeah, me just jogging Hell will be a place like that.
So
They
did you run
everywhere.
running in 10 meters flat out into massive guys.
Yeah. You get the collision and then you get up and do it again.
Awesome.
And then they try to do it to you.
Yeah.
And that's a whole nother level of fun.
Yeah.
You know?
That's exactly what we're talking about.
If I was a runner, I'd just every once in a while I'd see a car, I'd just throw myself at it. Just go, "Yeah, now I'm into it. Now I've got to feel this thing to be alive."
God, isn't that funny? and it's sort of like, but what we're doing now is we're giving people chemical straitjackets to adapt their stresses. Like you mentioned the benzos before, that is the most common treatment, diazepam or Valium, whichever one to call it. That's a really, says, oh, you're too stressed, we'll give you that.
Yeah, but you have a look at so the naturopath, and this is why I love herbal medicine. I absolutely love it. Let's go through some of the herbal Gabaenergic agents. We have withania. I love withania or ashwagandha. It's a very mild Gabaenergic compared to a kava or other benzodiazepines and a valerian or something like that. But it supports the thyroid axis and it supports the gonadal axis. So where we're talking about this stress axis is the HPA axis to the adrenals. It just takes priority over everything. It switches absolutely everything else off. So what we're finding, withania has the ability to mildly calm down the HPA, but more importantly, it builds the balance with the thyroid and the gonadal axis as they get switched off during stress. So it helps to reboot. Kava, straight out Gabaenergic, but kava also is anti-inflammatory and blocks pain. So by blocking pain, having a muscle relaxant effect and having an anti-inflammatory, antioxidant action, it actually reduces the burden onto the system. If we then look at turmeric, I think I mentioned that before. I don't think I said the word turmeric because I was nervous at the time, but I'm full of confidence right now. Turmeric is mildly Gabaenergic, but more powerfully, it's anti-inflammatory, antioxidant. Schisandra. I love Schisandra. I've told this story on podcast before that I love Schisandra since uni because I could cheat. Because at uni, they'd always say, name 3 herbs that are good for your lungs, name 3 herbs that are good for your liver, name 3 herbs that are good for your nerves. And I just put Schisandra in all of them because it does all beautiful. Of those things. And then what you find, Schisandra itself, mild anti-anxiety, mild Gabaenergic effect, but it helps if your pH gets out of whack, it helps to regulate acid-base balance. If you get toxic exposure, that knocks your liver. Phase 1 and phase 2, that's a big stress. That creates a lot of intolerances. Schisandra can help to reset a lot of those sort of things. So you find a lot of these herbs, you can match the herb to the person. So you can go back and go, okay, so you got the stress. We know that. Your adrenals are messed up. But in you've got immune inflammation. So we want to combine something that supports your inflammation and supports your immune system, and then with a Gabaenergic action to calm that down. And for you've got the gut problems, and you've got the allergy problems, and you've got no oxygen, and you're an idiot. You just eat everything wrong, and you've just got to regulate your blood sugar and stop eating toxic crap. You know what I mean? So you see these people, you got to treat the person, find out what their individual stresses are, help to manage that, so we're not putting them onto a chemical straitjacket.
Exactly.
A lot of the things we've been doing for years are so weirdly wrong, in my opinion. We mentioned earlier when you get a stress trigger, we get a nervous response to stress. Well, that's the same. That's a heightened process, the same as just normal alert and energy. So it's a waffly way of saying it, but what I'm trying to get at is when those systems become exhausted, we get a malaise, we get a fatigue because our nerves are exhausted. So things like vitamin C, that's got a reputation for supporting the adrenals during stress, doesn't. Vitamin C recycles your catecholamine. It's your nervous response to stress.
Yeah.
So you load someone up on vitamin C, they go, yeah, my energy's picking up.
Yeah, that's because the vitamin C is that cofactor for dopamine beta hydroxylase. Gets the dopamine converted into epinephrine and norepinephrine, and so they feel better.
So it allows them to manifest the nervous response to stress longer. You know, vitamin B5 was similar through the CoA. It can do all that sort of stuff. But there's so many things that we did wrong. Licorice is a really good one to understand. What licorice does, you see all this stuff. People want to ban licorice at one stage because of blood pressure concerns and all that sort of stuff.
Dose
what you got to realise is with licorice, what it does is it can actually preserve the half-life of cortisol. So if you use licorice in the morning, like I say, traditionally through the Chinese medicine, they do a bigger dose of licorice teas or something like that first thing in the morning. build up that cortisol in the morning, and then like a little half dose at lunch to allow it to wean off, and then none at all at night. So licorice, those people that get the big surge in the morning, but then they crash around lunchtime. Then they get like a second wind at night. So in the old mode, what they used to do is use the licorice to kind of prolong the morning surge of cortisol, so it was there longer. But of course, as we know, that same process can increase blood volume, hold a bit of fluid retention. So people that are susceptible to that can get blood pressure problems and fluid retention. But like you're saying, it's in really large doses of licorice. The only sorts of doses that you can get by binging on licorice treats regularly.
Yeah.
And then you get all the sugar and everything as well. That makes it all so much worse. Yeah. So things like licorice and that, but that's just managing that one cortisol.
Yeah, it slows down.
More importantly, push it down at night, that cortisol at night. What were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say, that licorice, like it stops the breakdown of cortisol, so it allows the cortisol also to float around for a little bit longer.
Yeah.
So
that has a sparing effect on the adrenals, sending a message back saying, hey, we've got some here. You don't need to pump any more out.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Now, you mentioned something earlier about like vigorous exercise, okay? Drives up adrenaline, cortisol. That's why your heart beats faster. Compare that to a lot of people who say go to the gym to smash themselves in the morning compared to doing it after dinner at night. How would you comment on that? How do you approach that?
Yeah, I see that a lot. Like people who, and I understand that a lot of people can only train at night time. So, you do what you got to do. Yep. But a lot of people who train around, 7, 8 o'clock at night, they often really struggle to wind down and sleep because, it's just not the exercise that revs them up, it's also the cortisol that's a stimulation that then hangs around for a lot longer. So the melatonin, because that's the time when melatonin kind of has to start kicking in. And so that's obviously, not happening. Possibly because, I didn't kind of think about it like that, but maybe that cortisol surge inactivates serotonin. Serotonin is needed to convert to melatonin.
Right? The research is showing that vitamin B5, through its ability to build CoA, it'll fix a lot of those symptoms of the malaise and the fatigue. But actually, more powerfully, B5 will stimulate acetylcholine. And if you think about acetylcholine versus norepinephrine, so norepinephrine or adrenaline, it's the one that does long-term memory, gut instincts, intuition, keeps you awake, shuts down the blood supply in your gut to make sure that you've got blood to go somewhere else. Like it creates that hollow, funny feeling in the stomach. It keeps you awake, stops you from sleeping, and gets you feeling on gut instincts and intuition. Acetylcholine, on the other hand, short-term memory, concentration span, close vision, attention to detail, increases digestive ability, supports a good quality sleep process, aids detoxification and digestion. It is important for other gonadal and thyroid accesses and muscle contractions and everything like that. So if you have a look at B5's ability to actually stimulate acetylcholine, the other thing B5 can do is stimulate melatonin. So a lot of people do mega doses of B5 in the morning thinking it's going to help the cortisol release, but more likely be building up acetylcholine throughout the day and allowing the body to have a good melatonin secretion at night. So you'd force down deep at night and then wake up with cortisol surge. By default, you could find plenty of data showing B5 can increase cortisol, but it may do it through melatonin. And I've been experimenting a little bit with it lately by taking big doses of B5 at night. And it's putting me into a much deeper, really good sleep, actually, as opposed to taking B5 in the morning.
Which is what I would have prescribed it as in the olden days.
For the adrenals, because we need the adrenals up in the morning. But it's not really. A lot of the stuff we're realising are best for by default, your adrenals going to go up. Like your adrenals do that because our lives are stressful. The challenge is actually getting the bugger down at night. And the simple process of taking burden off the adrenals, allowing it to flatten at night, is enough for it to spike and surge in the morning. We really, and that allows us to still have our coffees and do our morning exercise and all that sort of stuff that will support a cortisol surge through the morning.
Yeah, that's what you want. Now remember, cortisol, as you said before, it actually increases the reuptake of serotonin in the brain, so it drops serotonin. And that's why studies like this are coming out where they compare cortisol secretion in depressed and at-risk adults, and they're finding that if you've got a total cortisol load throughout the day, that gives you a much higher risk of getting depression. So one of the causes of depression or being susceptible to it is just simply high cortisol. It's not addressed in medical clinics, I don't see. And then you can have multiple forms of depression from you talked about it in your mental health episode you did just recently.
So I was going to kind of mention that. So first you get the high cortisol because of inflammation, which then has the the serotonin effect, and you can get a serotonin type depression, right? But
So how does that feel? Do you know, is that the depression born from anxiety, where you're up and buzzy depression, wired, or is that the depression born from apathy with fatigue? And
No. So that's more that wired kind of depression, right? And then, as we know, that cortisol surge can't carry on forever. So over time, it drops until you get the more flattened kind of, adrenal insufficiency. And we know that dopamine has receptors on the adrenal glands, which kind of like is how dopamine regulates adrenal function. But now because cortisol, your adrenal hormones is essentially that epinephrine and norepinephrine that comes from dopamine. So, but that drops down. So eventually, when it's down at that bottom, you're lacking in that norepinephrine, epinephrine, and dopamine when you need it, right? And dopamine depression is a different type of depression. That's where you end up with what we call anhedonia. It's the lack of joy. So it's not that you are, wanting to commit suicide or anything like that. And we have
Couldn't be bothered.
Yeah, it's just that.
You just can't be bothered.
Well, it's just like, well, I'm not happy, I'm not sad, I'm just going through the motions, like lack of motivation. So now you don't feel like exercising or training or doing anything anymore. So it's a slightly different type of depression.
I'll go back to bed throughout the day, and that's
so you go from that anxious insomnia down to that hypersomnia, flat, just can't get up and going.
You're screwed.
Yeah,
and it's
We're
terrible.
not screwed. We help them, Steve.
Well, they become very fatigued because of another mechanism, which is really interesting, is because cortisol drives the T4, you know what I'm going to say?
Yeah.
Down to reverse
That's
T3. So
correct.
their thyroid levels function.
Yeah.
They just collapse. So they're like this. And so that's one
Is
of the
that how, if we're not eating enough calories, our thyroid slows down?
Yep.
So when we've got low blood sugar, inadequate calories, cortisol is released as a catabolic agent to liberate some fuel to get us through. And at the same time, it shuts down your thyroid to say, don't burn this fuel as fast.
Because you're going to starve to death.
Yeah, so that's starvation.
It's a good mechanism.
Yeah.
I mean,
all these mechanisms are good. It's just that we want them during survival responses. We don't want them just because.
Yeah, while you're sleeping or something.
Yeah, because we don't have that. Like, we're designed to deal with these life-threatening stresses, and that's what these processes are for. But the problem is it could be the phone ringing, and then the bills need to be paid, and then another meeting, and then it could be an exposure to something in the office, and then you could have an intolerance, and then you could be scared of the news. You can have all of these things, and it just keeps all of them on top of each
Or a
other.
mortgage that goes on for years.
Yeah.
Or an arthritis that goes on.
And
for
a
years.
good point, because what happens is this cortisol is constantly coming out, and it's telling our body to relax, chill. It's okay. Switch it off. You've survived your stress. But at the same time, another stress trigger's coming in. And what we actually get is cortisol resistance. So we go through a phase. So what happens is, before we get into the cortisol exhaustion and the adrenal exhaustion or conservation, we go through a phase where our body's pumping out so much cortisol, our body's sick of seeing the bloody stuff. It becomes resistant to it. Because if you jumped out a pit of snakes into a pit of spiders and the cortisol's just been released saying, you're cool now, it's just, no shit, I'm going to ignore that, I'm going to go again. And so you have to do it. So then what happens is you become resistant to your cortisol. Now, that's something we could probably pick up through those testing as well, because if someone's manifesting all these symptoms of inability to switch off and this constant stress, and you see their cortisol's really high, they're possibly resistant to your cortisol, and they're going to go into a phase of exhaustion. That's how we can start to manage it really quickly and prevent those phases of exhaustion.
And the scary thing is the high cortisol you get causes depression, but also breaks down muscle tissue, puts on fat.
And it preserves that fat around your internal organs.
It's just terrible. And that causes other health complications. And then you'll end up...
Such as cholesterol, and then you end up on a cholesterol medication. Oh, my gosh.
Or you get pain and you go on an opioid.
Yeah, or the high cortisol suppresses your immune system and allows your microbes to overgrow.
Yep.
And then you're flooded with lipopolysaccharides. So we get into that. This is why you can't treat adrenals.
Yeah.
You have to work with people. And it's got nothing to do with, your adrenal problem is not a deficiency of a herb. It's not a deficiency of a thing. It's like, you have a look at B5. It's called pentothenic acid. Pento means everywhere. They can't even find a case of deficiency. They can't create it. They have to create it in a clinical setting. They're not allowed to do it in humans. It's like one of those things. It's like, so overdosing on something like that does not fit with the laws of nature.
That's right.
None of the herbs or anything we've mentioned here is any sort of recommendation for people to rush out and do it. If there was any recommendation from this, it would be take a step back, have a look at the things in your life. Honestly, most of us know 80% of what we're doing wrong and that sort of stuff. And we can make a lot of changes and remove 80% of the burden just by having good habits and that sort of stuff. Then work with your naturopaths and your whatever. But treat yourself or treat the person.
Yeah.
None of those recommendations was a prescription for anyone to rush out and buy any of those things and do any of those things.
No.
These are the sort of things you got to stop, take a look at yourself, collate your symptoms, do your testing, understand your reasons, where you're at, because you know where you want to be. So work out where you're at, what your individual triggers are, see what bloody things you can remove straight away. Because honestly, in my clinical experience, 80% of the resolutions we got from these sort of things was by removing crap.
Yeah.
It's all removing. No, we didn't have to add anything, because if you're adding something, whether it's a natural herb, Gabaenergic or whatever, it's no different to whether you're just prescribing them a chemical straitjacket or a natural one. They're all the bloody same. You're not treating properly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is so complex that I would suggest anybody who's listening to this who thinks they've got anything like this is to book into one of our naturopaths here. Because
or anywhere really. You've got to do everything, but just that little things like what's my brain doing when I'm training? You know, am I being present? Fuck, I forgot it.
Well,
There's this app that I was heard on the radio this morning. It's apparently really, really Smiling Minds or something. There's a cool new app out, and it just basically can give you little moments of where you can just stop and get a bit of zen. Like look for things like that, and because sometimes, we get stuck into these patterns. It's not until someone shows you another way, and you go, "Oh, geez, this feels very different."
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't realise that you're just stuck in this angsty mode for so long.
Go for a walk on grass.
Earthing.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, earthing.
Yeah, I love it. That works for me.
Yeah, I'm a fan of earthing.
Yeah.
Being present. Sex and chocolate. I reckon those things where we're most mindful during those two moments.
Yeah. Can we have sugar-free chocolate?
No, Steve. I'm not having sex with you either. You have whatever fucking chocolate you like, mate. I'm not putting out, but I want the flowers. I still want flowers.
It's such a complex issue, but what an amazing plethora of information there is out there on the adrenals and everything that affects it.
And for me, the big message is that the adrenals is a secondary issue. It's not the primary issue.
Yeah.
So I can't tell you how many people say, "Oh, no, I was diagnosed with adrenal fatigue." It's like, well, what does that mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we've got studies showing there's no such thing as adrenal fatigue.
Yeah.
It's called adrenal insufficiency.
Yeah, but these are the stupid words that people use. It doesn't mean anything.
Great
you've got Addison's disease, which is an autoimmune where they've ripped open your adrenal cortex has been eaten away.
This is
the rest of it is just messed up.
Yeah, this is a lovely paper titled, and you'll have access to this. Adrenal fatigue does not exist, a systemic review.
Yeah. But then they say adrenal insufficiency does.
It does, yeah.
It's just like,
that does.
Well, what about adrenal exhaustion, Steve? They didn't reference that. Therefore, it must be an anomaly. The unicorn of adrenal. What did I say? I'm so confused now because these words don't mean anything. It's a matter of showing your and also it's important to understand symptom pictures along with pathology. Don't ever just do pathology. And on the day that you do collect pathology, you must record your symptoms of how you feel.
Yes.
I don't know if you're resistant to a hormone or deficient in a hormone until I combine your symptoms with your pathology. And we need to know all that sort of stuff. So people need to do it all. Symptom picture, we need to look at food, we need to look at how we respond to food. And what you were saying before is really cool, because a lot of the cool new things that we're doing for intolerances, people aren't doing as many of the allergy testing anymore, IgG and IgM, because they're not useful enough. People can measure blood changes to blood pressure and blood sugar as a manifestation of a inflammatory or a stress response that your body may have had from a food. And I don't really care whether it's IgM, IgA, IgE or whatever in that instance.
Even heart rate variability. I often recommend people who've got the heart rate variability where they're measuring throughout the day. That can give great indications of possible food intolerances. You have a meal and you have like a change in that heart rate variability an hour later,
And that Will Ahmed that does the Whoop, we talk about that. He's gathering some wicked data in regards to things that people do that create changes to that heart rate variability they can measure on a watch. And his goal is to really help people recovery so they know when they're going to be performing at their best. But he uses all this stuff that we talked about is all collated just by seeing heart rate variability and see if we can measure the difference between the sympathetic nervous system that's driving the adrenal axis and the parasympathetic that's doing rest and recovery.
It's incredibly complex, and it's been an amazing podcast because it
Book
shines.
looks really bored though. I hope the audience likes it. These two over here are sitting there going, look at this.
They love it.
Bored.
But they've got their own recording. They'll watch it 3 times later.
It's true.
So they'll love it.
Brooke just watches us with the sound off. Just
Yeah, I know. She drools over me, but you can't help
Yeah.
that, I guess. Well, we've got to wrap this up, guys. Unfortunately, we've laughed too much, and hopefully that last bit got edited out. But we've been talking a lot today about adrenals and how it affects us. It is so complex that I think we've all got to take a look at ourselves and maybe see a practitioner. I've got to take a look at
After
myself.
the bit that just got edited out, and most of you people wouldn't have it. Steve needs to take a deep, hard, long look at himself.
Hard look at myself, absolutely.
Like a scenic route.
And I apologise if the tape gets out, but it wasn't me.
Nipples.
Yes.
And that's it from Nipples? Anything from you?
No, I think I'm done.
Thank you for attending, guys, and we'll see you all next week. See you later.
Bye-bye. Oh, gosh.
Oh, God.
You don't even allowed to say that. You're disgusting. Sorry. What? That's disgusting. That's not even hygienic.
It's not because of...
Oh, yeah, that's too far.
That's too far. Well, the other thing I said was too far.
Oh, now we edit that out, Steve. Don't touch my legs, Steve. That was a bit awkward. What the fuck is this table? The whole time I'm worried about people seeing up my skirt. Next thing you know, I'm feeling something up my leg.